All right, good morning, everybody. It's hot. The Olympics are on. And if you, like me, have school age kids, then it's the summer holidays. So I think anybody who's running a webinar in that context needs to be pretty confident that they can put on something that is engaging and compelling and interesting. So, above all else, that is what we are going to try and do in the next hour and a bit. I'm Rachael Orr. I am the CEO of Climate Outreach. And Climate Outreach really exists to think about the climate stories that we need to tell and the climate storytellers that we need. We think that the stories that we tell about climate change, the people that we listen to, that we engage in those stories, are just as important as the policies we need or the regulation that we need. And we think we need to pay just as much attention and just as much care to those stories as we do to all those other aspects of the climate transition. So I'm really excited this morning to be joined by a bunch of brilliant climate storytellers. And we've set them all the same question. What do you think that this Parliament's climate story needs to be? So this is not a webinar about what should the new government's policy platform look like. This is a conversation about what do we all need to be thinking, feeling, hearing about so that we can involve and engage as many people as possible in the really ambitious policy goals that we know we have to deliver in the next 5 years. So what we're going to do, we're going to kick off with a bit from Climate Outreach. We have done some research, the first bit of it earlier in the year with our Britain Talks Climate. And then we've just been doing some focus groups just before and just after the election. So we want to share with you the reflections, the insights that we heard from that research and those focus groups, and our kind of first thoughts on what we think the key building blocks need to be for this Parliament's climate story. We're then going to hear from 6 fantastic speakers who are going to have 5 minutes each to tell us what they think that we should all be thinking about. So we're going to hear from Emma Pinchbeck, who's the CEO of Energy UK. Hi, Emma. We're going to hear from James Murray, who's the editor of Business Green, from Anna Markov from the TUC, Sasha Josette from the Working Class Climate Alliance, Josh Akapol from Creators for Climate, and then Paul McNamee from Labour, Climate and the Environment Forum. But as I said, engagement is key for climate outreach, and the same is true for this webinar. So what we're going to ask you to do is, after we've heard from every speaker, we're going to put a Mentimeter up on the screen. And we'd love to hear from you, just your kind of instinctive reactions to what you've heard from each speaker. What did you like? What didn't you like? Was there something that really stuck with you? Was there something you thought they'd say that they didn't say? So we just want to really try and collect from you your thoughts and insights as we go through the session. Dave and I will do our best to kind of summarize some of those insights at the end. But really, Climate Outreach wants to take this forward and think about how we can really build, create, amplify, and work with you all to tell different climate stories throughout this parliamentary term. So, without further ado, I think we're going to start actually with a handing over to everybody. So we're going to put up our first Mentimeter. This is when we can check who's awake and paying attention and that everybody can make our tech work. So, Siri, Lauren, I think we're in your hands to ask people to, yes. So please, can you either scan the QR code that is on your screen, or you can join at the web link menti.com, and there's a wee code there at the top. And if you could just give us your kind of instinctive thought on what do you hope the government will say when they talk about climate change in the next 5 years? Just top of mind thoughts, no wrong answers. I'll just give a minute or two to do that before we hand to Dave. These are great. I like the combination of the issues and then the kind of urgency and kind of approach, kind of can-do attitude, and the mix of things that we've got coming up here. Okay, that's brilliant. And we're going to close this one now. And I'm going to hand over to Dave. Just one thing I forgot to say, we have disabled the chat because it's be a bit distracting if we're putting messages in the chat all the way through people speaking and your fabulous ideas. But if there is anything that we don't cover, or you have a burning question that you don't think is being captured by the Mentimeter function, please drop it in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to kind of flag those before the event closes. So, Dave, I'm going to hand to you.
Terrific. Rachel, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Paul, for joining. You just got the link. You're in. That's great. Welcome from sunny Crystal Palace. Bit too hot, bit too sunny in South London. So I'm going to take as little time as possible before handing over to our brilliant speakers. My name's Dave. I'm a Senior Advocacy Manager at Climate Outreach. What that means is it's my job and the job of the team here to talk to climate politicians, or all politicians, or people who talk to politicians about how to tell a brilliant climate story. Now, what we know and what today is all about is that brilliant climate stories are unique, and they come from people's authenticity and their lived experience. And there's not one story that everyone should tell. But that being said, we've been doing research, as Rachel said. We've had our Britain Talks Climate research earlier this year. We've just done some new focus groups. We've got 20 years worth of expertise in social science. And there are some bits that for the current moment, we reckon the government should be using and should be running through its communications. I'm going to just say a little bit about that before handing over to the first of our speakers. And a bit of context, I guess, just kind of maybe reminding ourselves about what climate change was and wasn't in the election that we've just had. I mean, it feels like, we're all ready for a holiday. It's been 2 months of flurry and activity and change. And it feels a bit like climate is suddenly a new permission to talk about climate change. Maybe some assumptions about how people thought and felt about the issue have been challenged a bit. What we found when we talk to people about climate is people do care about it. There's a lot of concern about it, but perhaps just as significantly, despite attempts by some to polarize and to make climate action seem like bad news, even in places like Clacton, a place that we did a focus group before the election, there's no real appetite for politicians not taking climate change seriously. People may not feel always that climate is the most important thing in their life, but they've got no particular appetite in general in this country right now for politicians not leading on it. And we say, if you're communicating about climate change, you should bank that. You should remember that. You should remember that most people do care, and there is not really any great sense that it's a thing not to take seriously. So even in Clacton, I think if a politician ignored climate change, they would be booed off the stage. Some things that we heard from our focus groups that back up work, perhaps add a bit of colour to work that more quantitative work we've been doing over the last 6 months. We would have conversations about climate change in places around the country, and people would immediately go to renewable energy. We did focus groups in seaside towns, and people there would sort of gesture figuratively off to sea and say, see that out there, see those wind turbines, they are brilliant. People think they're brilliant, they love them, they think they're great, a great success story, they're proud of them. People love clean energy, both in concept and when they think about specific bits of clean energy near them. So that's a thing to talk about, to remember, and to reflect. And I think really interestingly, and this is a bit of a challenge, I think, for the next 5 years, we have always found, and it's as true now as it always is, that when you have conversations about climate change with people, when you say, what does climate mean to you? Why do you care about it? People go to nature, they talk about nature, and they don't talk in the abstract. They talk about the things that they value, the nature that they love around them. And that's also true when people talk about their place and where they live. These are two examples of people that just went for talking about their local countryside or the local beach. It can be really tempting in climate and nature communications to keep them separate, to have climate stories and nature stories. That's not how people think, and it's not how the climate story needs to work over the next 5 years, when actually the speed of what the government is trying to do might mean, for example, building a lot of stuff quickly, where that might butt up against people's love for their local place. And what we need is a story that brings those together and doesn't separate them off. Not rocket science, particularly to anyone who pays any attention to any social media, but there is a lot of distrust in politics. In politics for its ability to really make a difference to people's lives. So we did this focus group just before the election. I doubt this has dramatically changed. And obviously Labour are very, very aware of this distrust that's out there. People thinking that politicians don't really do stuff for them. And when push comes to shove, people just aren't that optimistic about politics and and whether it will make a positive difference. Now, the government is setting out to deliver and deliver stuff quickly, but as well as delivering, it needs to connect with people in a way that makes people feel that they have delivered and gets over the hump, this thing that is stuck in our democracy about a deep distrust of big plans and government and their ideas to do something for us. This has to feel real and that it actually is doing stuff in practice. And then the fourth thing, and I think this maybe challenges something that is often heard or often talked about. People say they want a say in what's happening, and we know that. And particularly when we're thinking about building stuff, people like the idea of having a say. But we're not a country of NIMBYs. Sure, there are NIMBYs. There are people who don't want stuff built. But when we have conversations like we've been having around the country, and you talk to people, they can handle nuance. People understand. There is more. There are more shades of grey in people's views. People know we need to build stuff. Stuff needs to be built. They know that they have a say, and they might not get everything they want, and they can see that there are things to balance. So it's important to be honest with people about what's coming and the things that are non-negotiable, and then where things are negotiable, to give people a sense that they can have a say in it and to find ways to bring them in. So elements of the climate story, I'm going to shut up in a second and hand on, but what the government should do, we think it needs a brilliant, inspiring vision for what it's doing on climate change. Government's communication is grand at the moment. They are talking about climate change positively. A lot of talk about big economic success stories, big economic great news, and that's fab. The vision should also put people in there as well, so people feel inspired and informed about what's coming. And the people bits of that story that I think have been a bit lacking so far should reflect these things that people love, what people tell us that they love, and make it reflect the fact that actually climate is not a thing that freaky weirdos care about. The election didn't show that. When you talk to people, they didn't show that. Normal people care about this stuff. Normal people are increasingly concerned, and we all want to feel that we are part of a response that society is having all together. And to be straight with people about what's coming, treat people like grown-ups, and not worry that anything you say is going to get an immediate backlash. Make that story grounded in things that we can touch and feel, make it tangible and visible. And where there are things that people can have a say about, and we would say that should be as much as possible, that people will feel and believe they will get that say. So just another slide about that. I should say this is all taken from a new guide that we've just published, the New Parliament's Climate Story. Lauren, if she hasn't already, I know we'll put a link in the chat. So there's plenty more information in there. But here's some things that you can read in that guide about the specifics, some examples of how you might talk about reflecting what people love, reflecting how people care, and being straight with people in a climate story, and particularly the government's climate story right now. So that's all for me by way of framing, and I think Rachel hasn't had to shout at me, which is good. I'll come back in at the end and just say a few more things. But yeah, do download that guide, the New Parliament's Climate Story, and we'd love to know what you think of it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dave. I am now going to hand over to the first of our speakers, who is Emma Pinchbeck from Energy UK. Emma, over to you.
Hello. I think I've got 5 minutes to do this, and worse to come straight after David, who said loads of stuff that I would say. So we're all going to violently agree with each other, I hope. Look, I think this is what's the story for the next Parliament, and I'm speaking about this from an energy point of view. I would go to 3 or 4 messages, I think. The first has already been noted, which over the last few years, internationally as well as in the UK, you can see this sort of stepping back from ambition on net zero, even as, at least rhetorically, even as a clean energy transition is gathering pace, and an increasing gap for us in the industry between what we're trying to do, which is a very ambitious rollout of renewables and clean technologies, and a world where clean energy investment is now outpacing fossil investment, with governments that, for often political or kind of cultural issues, are talking about net zero in less ambitious ways than they were when I was working on the Paris Agreement back in, 2015. So I think the most important thing is ambition. And I'm saying that as, I suppose, an industrialist as well as an environmentalist, because we're trying to get investment into the UK, and politicians always underestimate just the sheer power of being positive and ambitious. And I think the new government has got off on the right foot there with talking about climate change as compatible with climate change action is compatible with growth, talking about their clean energy mission and their economic mission as aligned, setting targets which we feel are, kind of squeakily ambitious, and trying to, force us to move and to outpace the industry. And I think those things are all good. I also think on a kind of personal level, the message that people need to hear and have been hearing is that investing in clean technologies and tackling climate change is compatible with the economy, not an antagonist to it. So, both in terms of the growth you get from investing in new industries and kind of clean technologies, but also protecting us from economic risk. And a lot of people know, have experienced the energy crisis and know that it was caused by wholesale gas prices rising and the amount of gas that we import into the UK. And when we talk to the public, they really understand that that is an economic risk to them. But even without the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we were already seeing gas prices do volatile and unpredictable things, because weather patterns are less predictable than they used to be, and therefore gas demand and how people use energy is less predictable. And we had a kind of tracking up of the gas price because the Asian economy was behaving weirdly, largely due to like warm weather and the response to the COVID pandemic in itself, which was exacerbated by climate change. So I think being able to link climate much more holistically to the future economy and kind of prosperity and lived experience, that's the first thing. And to be very, very ambitious about investing in it because of the benefits. Second thing is, and it's been mentioned, you can see in the polling that in Western democracies, people do not believe that government will deliver for them. So I think it's got to be a huge amount of delivery that is very visible and tangible. And we have to explain it. The Inflation Reduction Act in the US has delivered like massive numbers of new factory consents, investment, often into Republican states. But what's interesting about it is it's not necessarily yet rewarding the Democrats at the ballot box. And that's because they've done the investment piece, but they haven't told a good story. And I suppose that's why we're all on this call. But you do actually, if you have the factories and you have the numbers, you at least have a story to tell. So we'd like to see kind of scale, pace, urgency with the actual delivery of infrastructure. That means stuff like planning reform, taking big choices on investing in renewables, which we're hoping to see this week, really visible stuff. And in that way, whatever is the industry we think collectively about GB Energy, you can see the logic in having a government brand plaque on stuff that they might build around the country, and doing more community projects where kind of people feel them in their neighborhoods. I think there's a very good story there. The third frame that I'll only do for is about bills and fairness. I think this is a decade where we're investing a lot in infrastructure, but we've also promised people that their bills will come down. And we're going to have to do everything we can, both in policy terms, but also in storytelling, to explain to people why this is fair, why this benefits them, to make sure it's just to make sure that we're, doing it as cost effectively as possible and bringing benefits forward as possible. I would argue that it can't just be middle classes benefiting, it has to be, all of society, and we have to use policy to engineer that so that people can really feel it. So there's a story to tell there. For the industry, we would say part of this is actually having the technologies, the products, the services that make this transition easy for people. So it's not just a climate story, it's also a, hey, your life is better story. And that it's a story about kind of modernity and better services and a better, cleaner economy that you don't have to buy into as an environmentalist, but just as, sorry to use this language, but a consumer, and to be fine with that if it speeds things up. And the very last frame that's been mentioned, and I haven't quite got this right, but it's something I think about all the time. This will be a decade with lots of local and national trade-offs. We've already talked about the fact I would quite like to build a lot of pylons, please and thank you, because I know we need to deliver the carbon budgets. But the small c conservationist in me completely understands that there is a conflict there with this idea that you can't change anything. A lot of people care about climate change because they fear that change coming. They want to preserve and to conserve. We've got to find a way to make conservation not about conservatism and not doing anything. And for me, the thing I think about all of the time is I live in a very beautiful part of the world. It's an area of outstanding natural beauty, but there are 2 wind turbines that you can see from my house on the hill. And my baby son is absolutely obsessed with them. Whenever I see them, that to me is a kind of message of protection of that landscape that I and like 7 generations of my family have lived in. And I see him inheriting it in mostly the way it is now because of the wind turbines on the hill. And we have to find a way of bringing that change, that new technology into that frame where people also feel it's protecting the things of the past. You know, that's one story that where I'm trying to kind of get at that, but I think that will be a real theme in this parliament, and we're going to have to get that right. There you go. There's a canter through my brain on a Tuesday hot morning. I'm sure others are going to do a nice job of saying, so hopefully the same things.
Emma, thank you very much. It was a wonderful canter. I'm going to ask for reflections from everyone now. If we can have our next Menti slide up, then please, what really landed? This is almost like live feedback, Emma. It's not how we mean it.
It's all right. If I had 50 quid for people saying, could you give me fewer ideas in one go, please?
So yes, what brilliant. Fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, if you want the kind of nutshell, that's the kind of big theme. But for me, the one that I really worry about is that difference between we are in building a lot of stuff, and unless we do something in policy terms, it won't necessarily immediately benefit people because benefits take time to come through. So the thing I'm saying to government all the time is you have to find a way to make this like personal and beneficial to people. And that is my hill to die on over the next 10 years. You know, that's the thing. I'm the infrastructure person, but I think it needs to feel personal and immediate. That's the project. That's the project.
Yeah. As much about change as it is about climate, or perhaps more.
Yeah, I think so. Because, you know, people are going to be asked to host a lot of new infrastructure. We're going to do lots of stuff. I think that's a really positive story. I think there are positive stories like that are about scale and industry and pace of the economy. But I think we're also going into people's homes. We're trying to decarbonize heating. We're asking people to adopt new technologies in cities. It will feel a lot more personal in lots of different ways, and benefits from that change take time to come through just in the way the markets work. So we've got to find a way to kind of give people immediate financial and other benefits to offset that change, I think, and to talk to them about it on a very meaningful personal level.
Yeah, I think that's so important, isn't it? People feel like they are being heard in some of those worries or concerns rather than being accused of, you know, being a blocker or of you know, not sharing the ambitions. I think it's legitimate to have concerns about things, and we have to find a way of acknowledging that.
Yeah.
Emma, thank you so much. We're going to hear next from James Murray, the editor of Business Green. James, over to you.
Hi, good morning, and thanks, Rachel. And yeah, really enjoyed that overview from Emma. And yeah, thanks very much for having me. So, what's the story of the Parliament? First thing I'd say is probably there's actually two stories of the Parliament, and actually in sort of any new era, kind of there's 2 ways of looking at it. There needs to be a story about the past, about the previous Parliament, as well as the story about what we're going into now. We need to set the frame of what we've just experienced. And doing the typical journalist trick, I'm just going to steal somebody else's idea. I was at an event before the election, during the campaign, actually, just after it had been called, with Tom Baldwin, who wrote the Keir Starmer biography, very much a Labour guy. And he was saying that the Labour, if they do win, and of course they did and won big, they need a clear story about why they won and what they inherited. And he said, if you think back, you know, in the 1980s, the winter of discontent, which is before I think almost anyone on this call was even born, is absolutely embedded into the British historiography. That sense of complete failure of that Labour government, you know, bodies on the street, rubbish piling up. That's kind of in our brains. The next time we had a big change, you know, Blair just hit them with sleaze. This was a tired, sleazy government that was gone. And then obviously everyone will be painfully aware of how astute or cynical, depending on which way you want to look at it, Osborne was with the credit cards maxed out. There's no money left. So what's the story about what's just happened, both economically generally and from a climate perspective, from an energy perspective? And I'm still not 100% sure that was. I mean, what that is. I mean, yesterday there was a really strong go on it from Rachel Reeves. But the part of the problem the government's got is there's been so much you could go on. Is it Partygate? Is it sleaze? Is it a decade of stagnant wages? Is it NHS waiting lists? Is it, you know, truss? Is it 5 PMs in 4 years? That's that, like, you know, or is it now cooking the books, which is what they seem to be going with tomorrow? There's almost too much to pick from, and there isn't that one single story of how we've got to where we've got, and where we've got is pretty bleak, to be honest. I mean, it's bad. You know, it's really, really bad. And from an energy and climate perspective, that same thing applies. So, you know, I think one of the most shameful instances of the last parliament was just after Russia had invaded, full-blown energy security threat to this country. The government put out an energy security strategy, and it was about nuclear projects that were going to take 10 years to build and drilling in the North Sea that would take 10 years to deliver any benefits, if it did at all. And there was nothing on energy efficiency. And it was briefed that they talked about maybe lifting the ban on onshore wind, but Jacob Rees-Mogg and Grant Shapps didn't like it, so they didn't. Just absolute full, I mean, you know, and I've written a lot about how well the government did on decarbonisation and all these other things where there was progress made. That was a full-blown dereliction of duty. That was shameful. And why hasn't Labour really landed that message hard? Because you need that baseline to then be able to tell the change story, which is obviously what they want to say. So I'd be really intrigued as to what that story is, that narrative is over what's gone on in the last 10 years. And I'm, you know, maybe that's a bit overly partisan. It can be a bit more nuanced. It can be, look, we made some progress, but we didn't lay the foundations for the next phase. Or we got pulled into the culture wars that most people don't actually care about and are distracting and damaging, and we want to end that. So I think there needs to be a backward-looking narrative that needs to be done, and that needs to be done really quick. Like if the government wants to create that base from which to build, they need to do that quick. And I'm still not sure they've done it quite as clearly and concisely as they could have done. Moving on to the more positive stuff going forward, I mean, I'd echo of what I think imagine everyone's going to say. I think there's a couple of sort of key things that will be needed. It needs to fit in with the overarching narrative, which seems to be around, obviously, change was the election campaign slogan. We're a government of service. Everyone keeps saying every minister's going to tell you're a government of service. So I think that needs to fit in. But I also think both of those can be seen as a little bit negative. There's got to be a positive story in there somewhere. You know, there's got to be something for younger people. And by younger people, I mean people under 50. You know, but, you know, there's got to be a positive story. And if there's going to be a positive story, what is it except the green economy? What is it except investment? And if you're going to invest, it's got to be in clean infrastructure. You know, there's nothing else really available to us. I mean, you could talk a bit about AI. You could talk a bit, I mean, that's a bit too esoteric. Rebuilding public services, that's just the baseline. That's just what people expect. If you're going to tell a positive story, it's got to be around clean and green. So I think positive, exciting, I think is one of the key words. You know, optimistic, just the sense that this is good. And I think that plays into what most people already think. And just a couple of other very quick frames, mindful of the time, but if you're going to do it, you've got to do it well. I think this is what Emma's touched on with the trade-offs question. I mean, again, so much of what was characterized as NIMBYism is opposition to, you know, housing estates that are built without school places, without GPs, without transport links, without all the stuff that would make those better homes, both for the people moving into them and the communities hosting them. And there's got to be a commitment to doing this well, that if we're building more homes, if we're building more clean energy infrastructure, yes, it's happening, but it will be done in broadly the right places and with the underlying enabling investment. That means it's not an imposition, it is a benefit. I think that's critical. I think the government gets that. Whether they can continue to get that as the pressures come on is key. The other two things, I mean, pace, the sense of pace and dynamism, again, they've really tried to embed that in the first couple of weeks, but I think everyone on this call will know getting clean power by 2030 is an optimistic goal. But if you're going to have any shot at it at all, you really have got to have this sense of pace and dynamism and priority, and they've got to move very, very quickly. I think they're doing that already, but it can't be moved quickly and break things. It's got to be moved quickly and create excitement and create energy. And just finally, one other big opportunity here is, I was reading a thread from Dave Roberts, the journalist in the US, who I'd recommend everyone follows if they don't already. and he had a wonderful thread last night about how the Democrats are calling the Republicans weird, and how that really works in our brains and really, really upsets the Republicans. You know, you've tried tyrannical, you've tried dangerous. That doesn't cut through with people who are more centrist and not as engaged in politics, as they're just weird guys. And they are really, really, really weird guys. And I think there's an opportunity here for some of that to come across, because the climate action, the clean technologies, the electric vehicles, they're normal now. They're normal. And the opposition to this stuff is a bit weird. So I'd hammer that. I would absolutely hammer that, because there's a chance now to bury it for a generation, and to stop that dragging and that sluggishness acting as a drag on the progress we need to make. And Rachel's telling me I've gone over, so I'll shut up now. Bye.
Thank you very much, James. I wondered where that weird was going to go, but I think you brought it round brilliantly. So can I bring up our next Mentimeter? I would love to hear what people, what stuck with people from what James just heard. I love that we did kind of politics and the more sobering reality, and then swung round to the much more kind of positive and optimistic. Yes. I think this point about reframing that the new green technologies is normal, not different, and kind of flipping that around is the time is right to do that.
I mean, I just love the electric car revolution. I just think it's absolutely staggering how quick that has moved. In the space of 10 years, that is now just completely normal. And you're seeing people driving them who you would never even imagine would consider driving them. And the little green tags, again, just one of the most simple little behavior change policy measures you could have.
Do you know how long that was debated in government, James?
I covered that for many years, Emma. I'm well aware that that was. You know.
Then you see them and you're like, oh yeah, that was actually a really good idea.
But I mean, that, you know, again, I know lots of people in the heat pump space are trying to do this, but it is the model to follow. It's you know, trying to emulate what happened there, and what happened surprisingly quickly, much quicker than many people expected.
Yeah. I'm especially enjoying that someone's posted a link to what they've called a crazy dance guy video, which is definitely where I'm going to be going first. James, is that you? Is that just
no, that's not me.
No. I mean, is it a clip of you? Is that you posting your?
I tend not to dance as a general rule. No one wants that.
Brilliant, thank you. These responses are brilliant. James, that was great. Thank you. So our next speaker is Anna Markova from the Trade Union Congress. Anna, over to you.
Yep. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me here. The question that I kind of want to start with and address is, how is the climate story of this parliament one of agency, one of people making things, building things, owning things, and not just stuff being imposed from on top? Because the way the trade union movement sees it, that's one of the biggest risks here. And when I say that it should be a story where no one's left behind, obviously there's some people who might be left behind, and they're the people who fly around in private jets, and that is not the people that I mean. The people that I mean are the people who are very connected to Britain's industrial heritage, Britain's industrial past and industrial present, people from coal mining families, people from the families where people work in steel and automotive and all of these industries where jobs may or may not exist, depending on what the government does in sort of 10, 15 years' time. And like I say, I think the story should be of Britain can make things again, but Britain can build things again, Britain can own things again. Making things, that is, you know, if you're talking about steel industry family in South Wales, then you should be able to tell a story that investing in upgrading the steel plants will actually secure the jobs that are there for the next generation. They may not look the same, but they will also be secure, safe, well-paid, good jobs. And there's a note here, the phrase green jobs, as hopefully people are aware by now, doesn't really land generally with people who don't talk about it on a daily basis. Good jobs, on the other hand, jobs that are meaningful, that pay well, that are stable and safe, those are the jobs that we ought to be talking about. But it's not just about jobs. It's also, let's say, for a Nottingham, there might be a local power plant project brought by Great British Energy that puts solar panels on the roof of the hospital, and that saves enough bills to improve the staffing levels at the hospital, because the hospital isn't saving silly amounts of money, isn't spending silly amounts of money on energy. Or you might be talking about a boiler engineer in Leicester who has spent his entire working life. He might be 50. He might be spending his entire life installing boilers and fixing boilers in people's homes. Now, that person is not going to have to change jobs, but maybe his daughter will go and train up to run a heat network instead, or a different heating technology. But being able to see those pathways, being able to see not just your own job and your good job staying with you, but also your kids getting into those good jobs is really important for that story. So yeah, making things, building things, and owning things. It needs to involve thriving industry. It needs to, I mean, we've already heard the government saying at various points, decarbonisation is not the same thing as deindustrialisation. We need to be able to actually demonstrate that. And safe and affordable energy independence is obviously something that we've seen over and over again. People are motivated by, as other speakers have already said. At the same time, while we're not in this webinar talking about policy, it is important to me to say that these promises need to be real. We've seen quite a lot of promises that if you think about Scotland and the promised tens of thousands of jobs building offshore wind turbines, those jobs have not really materialized, at least up until the last few years. Has kind of ticked up a little bit with the kind of more recent investments, but the story of the first kind of decade of building out offshore wind in the UK, and particularly in Scotland, has not brought the numbers of jobs that had been promised. So we need to be able to actually say these promises are real and feel confident in that. And if we don't do this, if the promises start to feel like empty promises, or start to feel like more empty promises, then what you get is the far right capitalizing on the distrust and the disillusionment and the sense of being left behind that breeds. So I think while focusing on the right story, it's really important to make sure that that story is real. And that story is one of agency, and that story is one that lets anyone in the country, and particular people in the country who are at risk of otherwise being left behind, feeling like they can make things, build things, and own things. And that's me.
Anna, thank you. That was fantastic. Again, if we can have the Mentimeter up on screen, brilliant. Was particularly struck by your insights about good jobs and green jobs. I think it's always, yes, people in our sector just assume that everyone understands what a green job is. And then whenever you talk to anybody who doesn't spend their time thinking about climate, they sort of look at you and think, what on earth are you talking about? And I think that intergenerational good jobs is such an important point, and such a great opportunity, right? There are some amazing opportunities here if we can get this right. Yes, lots and lots of people, that message really landing. Fantastic. And I think your point about agency is the other thing that really stuck with me. We can't sell people something that isn't real and isn't good just by, doing some good PR. That can't be what this is. It's got to be completely linked up. Brilliant. Anna, thank you. So our next speaker is Josh Akapo, who is here for Creatives for Climate and an organisation called Archetype. Josh, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much for having me, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the climate crisis, aka the heat wave that we have right now. It's wildly warm. I honestly woke up this morning and I saw 31 degrees on my BBC weather app, and I was like, oh, we're here already. And that's because, of course, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I mean, we should already know this. We've been operating at about 1.5 degrees of warming based on the Industrial Revolution to present. for the last 12 months at least, and those reports were out at least in February. Also, just want to check before I continue. Can everyone hear me all right? Is it all good? Perfect. Yes. We kind of know that we are very much running out of time, and especially in a UK context, we have, I guess, been plagued by definitely quite a few have already spoken about the previous parliament and the previous governments that we had under that parliament, and sort of how, I guess, a lot of the climate promises that were either promised in 2019's Conservative manifesto or that have been dropped out of the 2024 manifestos and have resulted in, you know, the moment of change that we now have with this new Labour government. Unfortunately, it does feel like we are in quite a bad place with that. And we do need that moment of change. And it's very interesting now that we do have that Labour landslide victory, because as someone who myself, I'm part of the mythical Gen Z generation, which everyone says that they understand so much about, yet they're all confused by how our behavior has been so plagued by economic and ecological realities over the past, since we were born, basically. It doesn't feel like that much of a victory for someone like me. And I'll go into that as I talk about sort of what this new Parliament's climate story should be. I don't profess to be any kind of soothsayer or fortune teller, but I do like to go back on ourselves and look at what our climate story has been and how these said storylines have developed for certain groups of people. So I remember when Rishi Sunak wasn't elected, but was made prime minister somehow, he said that his cabinet was the, quote, most diverse cabinet in history. And that was very interesting, given that they were also one of the most privately educated cabinets in history as well. And their policies, of course, we're not talking about policies today, but their policies reflected anything but the diversity that they were touting. And their makeup also contained people who don't have an ecological framework or a stewardship framework as to how they actually view the land. It was made up of landlords, overwhelmingly, made up of middle and upper middle class members of society. And unfortunately, it's had a passed down effect of that sort of feudal British tradition culture in those sort of classes, which has obviously meant that their policies are viewing the land as more of a resource, viewing, and that's why, you know, North Sea oil opened back up in sort of Sunak's policy, and why so many climate pledges that even Johnson himself promised in 2019 just were completely dropped and not kept. But we are going towards a more positive change with that, because now, instead of 54% of MPs in Parliament having attended a state school, the number is now 76% that have attended a state school, with only 23% attending private schools, which is great. However, we're still not yet at the representative of society levels of representation in Parliament. And we do have quite a way to go, because unfortunately in this country, the most marginalized folks from low-income backgrounds are the ones who, in the global south especially, are affected by the climate crisis, but also here in the global north. They often live in areas with higher pollution, in areas around things like waste incinerators, more likely to experience fuel poverty, and more likely to have suffered some of the harshest effects of the cost of living crisis. And it's so interesting that this sort of started off with Dave's brilliant dive into that research and those anecdotes from people from around the country, because it's lovely to hear that people are protective of the nature around them and of the nature that they have access to. But unfortunately, that nature is just not spread evenly. For example, in a Greenpeace and Runnymede Trust report, only 37% of Black people were found to actually not have, 37% of Black people were found to not have access to green spaces, which is compared to 10% of white people. That's an alarming number, over 1 in 3 Black people not having access to any green spaces around their lived areas. And we also must remember that it is in spaces like that, built up urban, highly polluted areas, that Ella Kissy Deborah, a young Black girl who was the first registered death in the UK due to air pollution, died 10 years ago. And it's not a merely unfortunate individual tragedy, but it's a deep-rooted systemic issue which defines our collective climate story. And oftentimes, I think we want to get straight into policy, and we want to get straight into impact, and we want to ensure that people understand that the climate solutions are in their best interest. But oftentimes, if people aren't made aware, or aren't necessarily believing the narrative that often comes top down, then we need to think of another solution as to how we can cultivate a more climate responsible culture, which then leads to much better sort of policy uptake and actual delivery. And this is also on the heels of
Josh, if you could start
oh, yep.
wrapping up for us, that'd be great.
100%. And this is also on the heels of a Labour government that is in Parliament with about 3 million less votes than they had in 2017. So how do we get to the point of reshaping our climate story for the better? That is literally, we do that with culture, and we do that with culture centering community at its heart. So with the understanding that people make up communities, community shape culture, and culture shapes people. And that's kind of the work that I do with Creatives for Climate, and I'm more than happy to go into that later. But it's really about ensuring that the community is centered in our climate story, and that we go from a grassroots approach upwards into policy, into development, and into change to ensure that we have a climate justice solution.
Josh, thank you. That was fantastic. If I can ask for the next Menti slide. Some brilliant comments coming in already. Yes, I wanted to hear more from Josh too. I'm just very aware we've got a couple of other speakers and a time limit, but that was great, Josh. And I think how we centre far more of our stories and actually think much more about our storytellers coming from those community settings, having kind of reach and profile in kind of popular culture, as you said, so that this story is much broader and much more diverse, and so that then it resonates with more and more people. And I think you made those points so effectively. Brilliant. Fantastic. So we have two speakers left to hear from. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Sasha Josette. Sasha.
Hi, yeah, I'm Sasha. I am going to speak as an organizer for the Working Class Climate Alliance. So I don't know if that makes the story I'm going to tell different or the same or from a different angle. So let's find out. But first, I want just to welcome you all to take a really deep breath, close your eyes, look at your cat, do something just to make you feel like, I know, a little bit more relaxed. It's still early in the morning and it's early in the week. And what I'm going to ask you might be a bit difficult because for the next few minutes, I want us to imagine together what the future could look like. And frankly, it's going to feel a bit like a dream because, well, is it really on Starmer's agenda? What happens if this government's climate agenda isn't internationalist or democratic enough at its core? We're seeing the authoritarian drift across Europe and the rise of the far right. So asking you all to dream in this political context is a bit hard. So take that breath, stroke your cat. For this few minutes, we're going to imagine a story of this government is a future that we create together, a story with our new government, not by the government for us, but a radical story shift in how we do politics, with us and not onto us. In 5 years' time, this government will have co-curated and let loose on the country and the world a truly democratic, most radical climate policy that is rooted in working class communities and internationalism. We will be unleashing together a force, a people power greater than the UK has ever seen before. It will have an impact on the whole world, as this story is about the journey from colonizer to justice, equity, and collective care. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? Maybe even idealistic. And I bet some of you sitting here thinking that I'm far too romantic. Well, what if I told you that this work had already begun? In 2018, this work started in a little room inside Parliament with a conversation between me, then part of the community organising unit, a few like-minded policy folks, and Becky Long Bailey MP. we asked ourselves what the story of a Labour policy for a green industrial revolution would be. And with this shared dream, shared vision, shared politics, we began a journey of working with the organising team in constituencies all around the country to co-curate a climate policy that first and foremost belonged to the people. This was a team that truly believed, most importantly, that working class people had already the solutions to the climate crisis, and that our job was to organise in communities towards participatory policy events to listen and respond in kind with a localised climate agenda that was connected to a national, even international, and also the party manifesto. These spaces attracted 250 to 300 people at a time in areas where most local CLPs would be lucky to have had 20 to 30 people for an event. That is how popular and important climate work is to our communities, to working class people, and how powerful organising is. We had roundtables with school strikers, poets, musicians, workers from local power plant and local industries, vicars, business owners, and even one table full, just like surrounded with yellow t-shirts of the fracking nanas themselves. It was lively, full of debate, full of ideas and solutions to local problems, transport, education, community energy schemes, and so much more, building working class climate leaders along the way. This team of ours planted the seeds in a small room in Parliament for this new leadership to pick up and carry into government if they choose to. So let's imagine that this one last piece of the left leadership continued and grew into the Western world's first and most radical people-powered climate agenda, from warm social housing, solar panels, community energy, nationalising transport, water, and ending arms trades to genocidal states, and even reparations to countries the UK have colonised and remain having an inequitable economic and political interest in, countries closest to the pain of the climate crisis. And imagine a climate agenda led by working class people, people of colour, global South countries impacted by centuries of colonialism and extraction. That would be transformational. In this story, there is no going back. It is irrelevant actually to leadership. It's revolutionary and democratic at its core. And as I said, when I asked you to think back to 2018, when the small seeds were planted, this story is very possible.
Sasha, thank you. I feel very inspired. Can we have our next Menti slide? What's stuck with you from Sasha's brilliant storytelling, I think. Yes, I think the setting up the vision exercise and inviting us all to think about that with you, Sasha. I think there's space for doing a lot more of that with a lot more people in a lot more places as we think about our climate story. And yes, very uplifting. I will definitely take that away from what you have said. A point about new leaders. I think that this, who are our storytellers, is something that we definitely want to keep thinking about and coming back to. Fantastic. Thanks so much, everybody, for staying with us and for your ongoing, really brilliant participation. Our final speaker, last but definitely by no means least, is Paul McNamee from the Labour Climate and Environment Forum. Paul, thank you.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks for having me. The absolute beauty of going last is I think every single person has made points that I was going to make, so I'll probably just repeat things you've heard, but in a slightly different way is my aim now. So the exam question is what should this Parliament's climate story be? I've tried to kind of build in what it should be and what it possibly will be. So both to be either neither too positive or too negative. I've also tried to, I've split it into kind of 3 different areas, like, because I think this story will change. One is kind of now, one is the brunt, and then one is like the final year of this Parliament. So for now, I think kind of the point that has been made is actually the government has hit the ground running, and I won't repeat things that are being said, but you know, some of the things they've already put in place, GB Energy, the kind of some of the changes to the planning system, and like the fact that Keir Starmer had his first 6 steps, and GB Energy is the first one to be crossed off, right? It's good, there's energy. And then also like Ed Miliband also reclaiming some of our international, like global leadership and the space there has been good. So like, can you say this will be the most climate friendly government ever? That's kind of to be worn. Where I think there is like where there is already a sense is that this could be the most climate friendly Parliament ever. Where I have real hope at the minute is the new tranche of MPs, Labour, but also across the board of the people that have now come into the Parliament. We're seeing people, I think, both because of generational reasons, like they've grown up with this issue. They are kind of like not held up in this kind of like 90s ideological thing where climate and environment was always this fringe one. They have grown up, they are of an age where like this is a central issue to them and the people that they represent, but also like people that you know have worked in the NGO sectors, have worked in industry, have worked in the trade unions on these issues, are already knowledgeable, are already engaged, and I think that's really good. And I think we need to kind of, to build our mandate, absolutely be nailing down now that this is the most climate friendly Parliament ever, and we need to use that energy that they have brought to ride that way for as long as possible into the Parliament. So I think that's something that we all can kind of get behind now, like to keep that pressure on government to make sure that they maintain some of the ambition that they're showcasing, because you know 5 years is quite a long time. So that's now. For the brunt of it, it has been mentioned quite a bit, but I think the defining political issue of this Parliament is going to be this kind of rollout of climate infrastructure, this climate planning, this kind of engagement with communities and workers and people, and making sure that you bring them with you on what you are trying to do, and fundamentally make sure that this is being done with them, not to them. I think there's a real risk if done incorrectly, or if using the right framing, using the wrong framings and the wrong narratives, this becomes a kind of climate versus nature issue, as kind of Emma alluded to, or it becomes a local versus national issue, or it just becomes a builders versus blockers. And then kind of on top of that, I think whilst we will all be focusing on the story that we want it to be, you know, the past few years has shown that there are bad faith actors who are always going to be trying to make the worst of this. They're going to try and make this a wedge issue. They're going to try and make this a culture war issue. I mean, what we've seen in kind of particularly air quality over the past years, and to the point where not just on policy, but on kind of like personal safety for politicians is going to be a growing issue. So I think Labour need to be getting this absolutely right now. There has been some like good signals that, you know, kind of making sure that nature and conservation, small C conservation, is built into these ideas from the start, and that there is some form of consultation. But Labour need to kind of have that. They need to walk this path basically for the entirety of the Parliament, and it is going to be tough. It's a really hard story to tell, and it's going to have to be constantly done and constantly watching their language and how they do it, because I think it could go wrong both ways, and it's absolutely fundamental that they need to get this right. Then I think kind of going into the final year of what this Parliament looks like, just 2 stories from this week that I think are really interesting. The one being that, like, for the first time ever, the UK is no longer in the top 10 manufacturing nations in the world, or since records began. And the second, I thought this was definitely going to be a unique for me, but James got in there. My new favourite politician at the minute is Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota, who's the one who came up with the framing of this, the weirdness of kind of his political opponents. This idea of kind of calling a spade, right? And like just claiming the narrative, like let's be honest about what we do, but also how he describes the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act and the Jobs Act in America, is talking about it in a way. He's on the short list for to be Kamala's VP, so he's doing quite a lot of Twitter content at the minute, and he's great. I would encourage you all to look him up. But kind of like just coming out, he talks the talk. He sounds like a normal human being. He goes like, we get accused of socialism, we just build factories, right? So this is the kind of like this is his approach, and how he's describing how he's bringing these kind of sustainable, not green, but good quality unionized jobs to his area, to his communities. So I think kind of like in that final year, what we want is, dare I say, we don't want a climate story, right? We just want people in communities across this country kind of going to their local good quality unionized jobs on good quality public transport, living in communities with green spaces, with kind of good quality houses. They're not even thinking about this as climate. It's been done kind of with them. They've been consulted, they've kind of moved there, and they have this sense of energy security, right? We as a nation are kind of providing. So I think what the actual story is then, what I would say is kind of this isn't a climate story. This is one of kind of like community pride and national pride. And I think kind of Keir Starmer at the minute, he's using this narrative of a decade of national renewal. I think there's some really good stuff to kind of explore what that could mean and what that could look like for us, because I think you can build everything that we've kind of been talking about today into that narrative to be like, this is the climate story, and it is one of renewal, and it's community pride and it's national pride. So that's me.
Paul, thank you. What a great note to end on. What stuck with people from Paul's really insightful kind of political take? Be honest and claim the narrative, be human. I think you're kind of watch out, Paul, things that we need to kind of be really focused on, where we, things might get tricky, and how do we be on the front foot. But I think this framing about kind of community and national pride is really powerful, and we know it resonates for lots and lots of different people, lots of different audiences. And I was also really struck by your challenge, which I think is a really important one, about like, how much do we take the word climate out? I think there was a reflection from somebody in one of the Q&A points as well about sometimes if we always make this a climate story, that can turn people off, and there needs to be a recognition that we don't need to be always talking about climate. This is a story of, kind of togetherness and community and progress and opportunity in the future. And it doesn't always need to be a climate story. And I think how we think about that is really important. Fantastic. It's been wonderful to hear such a wide-ranging kind of group of speakers. I think I've heard lots of things that have really made me think, lots of points of similarity, but a few really important points of thoughtful difference as well. Just before we try and kind of sum up and talk about what we think we might do next, we're going to ask one final time, if we may, for people just to give us, including our speakers, if you're happy to, one thing that stuck with you from the session overall. We've heard an awful lot, but if there was kind of one thing that you think has really, you will really take from today, if you could capture that for us. Thank you. These are great and really helpful. I like the point about teenage storytellers. So I think just 2 points from me kind of in closing. And one, I suppose, builds on that point about teenage storytellers. Paul and his colleagues hosted an excellent event last week where Ed Miliband was speaking, and I think he made kind of some reference to who are our storytellers. And Climate Outreach has been thinking a lot about this in the past few years, but we've done some kind of extra work on research work on it in the last few months in particular. I think we think an awful lot about what our messages need to be, what some of our content is, and we don't think enough about the messengers. I don't think we think enough about the people who are already speaking about climate and how they can make their communication as impactful and empathetic as possible, but also how we can support a new generation of climate storytellers. It's work that we have been doing and would love to do more of, but I think it's a crucial bit of the puzzle that we need to be thinking about and investing a lot more in. And then I think my final reflection, I mean, today's session has been so rich, and we will look through all of your comments, and we will kind of think about where we think this really important work needs to go next. I think for me, there are some central themes that have been really, really consistent across all of our speakers. And then there have been some really interesting bits of kind of nuance. And I think that reflects, what are those kind of headline unifying things that we know we need to kind of hold together as our climate story. But then how do we make this interesting, bespoke, relevant to different people and to different places? And I think that is a kind of central challenge for the government, for us, for anyone who's thinking about how they talk about climate. But my overall reflection is I still think far too much climate communication that is out there in the world starts from a narrative of doom and despair. And the science is frightening. We all know that. But the vast majority of what we have talked about today is about potential and hope and people and community and connection. And I think we as climate communicators just need to be really, really mindful that as often as possible, when we are talking about climate, whenever we're talking about climate, we need to make sure we hold that. We shouldn't be, we should be honest with people, but I think people get it. People understand how scary the science is. But that fear can just be kind of paralyzing. And nothing about today has felt paralyzing. It's felt to me really optimistic. It's felt like there is a real desire and a real possibility that we can make some change happen. So I want to say a massive thank you to all of our speakers. I want to say a massive thank you to everybody who's attended and has participated so brilliantly in the Mentimeters. And hopefully we can take forward a story that is above all else centered on hope and on people. Thank you.